Have you ever sat in a doctor's office feeling dismissed when trying to explain your symptoms or leave an appointment overwhelmed with more questions than answers? For so many women, especially in midlife, this is a familiar story. But what if I told you there's someone who not only understands the struggle, but has dedicated her life to empowering women to take charge of their health? Today, we're talking to Dr. Sharon Malone, who believes in the ever-changing healthcare landscape, it's every woman for herself. And not in a discouraging way, but in a way that can ignite your power to become your own best advocate. Are you ready to take charge of your health like never before? Let's get started. Welcome to Pleasure in the Pause, a podcast dedicated to inspiring midlife women to feel more connected to their bodies, pleasure, and power through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, women's health and sexual wellness coach, and it is my pleasure to be here with you. I'm thrilled to welcome today Dr. Sharon Malone, who's here to share invaluable insights on how to take charge of your health in midlife. Dr. Malone is a nationally renowned OBGYN and menopause expert, the Chief Medical Officer of Alloy Women's Health, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Grown Woman Talk, an empowering guide to navigating midlife health. With decades of experience and a passion for advocacy, she has helped countless women find clarity, confidence, and control over their health journeys. In this episode, Dr. Malone will shed light on the changing healthcare landscape in America and why it's more important than ever to be your own best advocate. She'll share actionable strategies for navigating the healthcare system, what every woman should know about menopause and its impact on health span, and how telemedicine is transforming access to care for women over 40. If you've ever felt dismissed or overwhelmed in the doctor's office, or if you're looking for ways to take control of your health during midlife, this episode is for you. Let's dive into this empowering conversation with Dr. Sharon Malone. Welcome, Dr. Malone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Malone, it's truly an honor to have you here. You're such a trailblazer in women's health, a New York Times bestselling author, an OBGYN with decades of experience, the Chief Medical Officer of Alloy Women's Health, and a fierce advocate for midlife women. Your work has inspired and empowered so many of us, and I'm thrilled to have this chance to dive into your insights, your expertise, your wisdom today. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
It is truly my pleasure. You know, this is my favorite topic. You know it.
I've had the pleasure of meeting you and listening to you speak at menopause conferences in New York, LA, Austin. I see you as a kind of northern light for midlife women's health. Hearing you speak and reading your book, which I have right here, Grown Woman Talk, it's clear you have this inner fire for women's health advocacy rooted in a very personal history, which you describe in your book. Could you share with our listeners how your story shaped your mission in women's health?
Yes, I'm from Mobile, Alabama. And being from Mobile and growing up and being raised by parents who were raised in the Jim Crow South really shapes your perspective of how you see the world. And when I think about healthcare and I think about prevention, that was never a part of my life growing up. To give you an idea of how much of the lifespan that my family has just in one generation, my mother was born in 1914 and my father was born in 1893. So you can imagine turn of the 20th century in Alabama was not a very welcoming place for Black people and certainly not a place of access for healthcare. And growing up with that environment and knowing how difficult it is and how poorly served most of us were in terms of the healthcare system, it has informed how I've chosen to practice medicine. Because I know what it feels like on both sides of that desk, not just being the doctor and giving advice, but also being in a position needing help and often not getting it when we needed it.
Yeah, and so many of the stories that you share, they belong to women in your family, your patients, your own personal stories. I personally resonated with many of the stories, some of the silencing that goes on amongst our family members when it comes to talking about our health. And I love how you are unmuting that silence, really breaking the silence and the shame about talking about our own health. And I know you give this as a very important tip in the book, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I love your book so much, Grown Woman Talk. I love the name, and it really is an empowering roadmap to help us take charge of our health. The book feels like sitting around a cozy living room or kitchen table talking about real topics that impact us, but not only us, but everyone around us, right? I kept thinking about my mother when I was reading this book, about my sisters, about my aunts. And I especially appreciate, like I said, how you infuse it with your own personal stories, those of your family members, and your perspective as a medical provider. And it gives such a grounded yet actionable lens on midlife women's health, covering how our bodies change, what to watch out for, and what we can actually do about it. What inspired you to write this book, and why did you feel now was the right time?
It's funny that I never seriously thought about writing a book. And one of my favorite sayings is there are really no accidents in the universe. And I think that first year of COVID, 2020, when I had been in my practice for almost 30 years at that point, and I had that little gap of being home for 3 months, when we were all in the COVID emergency. And I had the time to sit still. And let me tell you, there's a lot of value in being able to sit still instead of just not doing the next thing because it's the next thing and the next thing. And when I sat home for those 3 months, I thought to myself, I think I'm done with this phase of my life. Now, I didn't have anything in particular planned, but I decided, okay, that's it. And if I do nothing more than just come up with something later, I'll figure that out. That's when I made the decision that it was time for me to leave my private practice. As fate would have it, just at the time I was planning to leave my practice, I did a podcast with my friend Michelle Obama. And that's how the founders of Alloy and Monica and Fallen Water and Monica Molinar found me. And so I think it's just, there are no accidents here. They found me and they said, oh, we're thinking about this startup. So what do you think? And I was like, that sounds interesting. Let me go tell the people that I work with that I'm quitting first, minor detail. But when I did, I promise you, I've never looked back, because what I did with Alloy, which is really working on perimenopause and menopause and trying to get women who did not have access to care, it was in that process that somehow the idea of a book came up, probably about a year in. And I honestly said to myself, I don't really want to write a book about menopause. That seemed the natural thing to do. I said, because I think that the issues that we face in midlife, menopause is a huge part of it, but there are all these other things that I noticed that were happening in medicine that have changed dramatically since I started 30 years ago. And I said, people need to know this. They need to know how to access care, what's changed, what's important, what's not. And more importantly, what is your responsibility in this whole thing? And when I initially wrote the proposal for the book, the working title was A Love Letter to My Sisters, which is why each chapter starts with a letter, because it was a book that was written from the perspective, not just, I'm a doctor, let me just tell you how everything works and what you need to do about it. I wanted it to be personal. I wanted it to come from the perspective of not just a doctor, but someone who's a friend, who's a sister, who's a daughter. And these are the things that I wished that my family and friends knew. And I wanted the readers to know as well, because what became abundantly clear to me was that even in interacting with my friends and my family, I realized that really smart people with really good insurance and that should have good access, they were still leaving these interactions with doctors not really fully understanding what was being asked of them. And a lot of times just wasn't even discussed. They would ask me, and I said, did your doctor not explain that to you? Or did they not bring this up? Or did they give you another option? The answer was invariably, no, they didn't. So that was really the organizing principle of the book. And the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting?
Yeah, I read it.
We all did. Even as an OBGYN, I read that book. But I said to myself, I want this book to be what to expect if you expect to live beyond 40. What are the kinds of things that I can go back to? I can read the whole book, but there may be certain chapters that speak to me at certain times of my life. It may apply to me. It may be something that will be important for my parents. But I wanted it to be that, to feel like a warm hug from someone that you trust who really has your best interests at heart. And if that's how the book is received, then I've done my job.
It was definitely received way by me. I also listened to the audio, which was so beautiful to have you within earshot, feeling like you were sitting right next to me, speaking to me and giving me that advice. So thank you so much for writing this for all of us and reading your book. It was so eye-opening, especially I lived abroad in the UK for 16 years and recently moved back to the US, which is my home 2 years ago after being away for so long. And navigating the healthcare system has been so dizzying and overwhelming. And reading your book, it was just like, it's not just me. This thing is really hard. I really thought there was something wrong with me that I just didn't get it. In your book, you say, I quote, the changing medical landscape. It's every woman for herself. No one is coming to save us. And that really resonated with me because I've had to summon the courage, the strength, the energy, the stamina to advocate for myself and for my mother, for whom I'm caregiving, in conversations with my doctors. So before we dive into some of the actionable tips, because chapter 2 is just, oh my gosh, that chapter is so incredible with tips to follow in terms of advocating for yourself and owning your health. Can you explain why it's so critical, given the past, present, and future of our healthcare system, for women to take full charge of their own health?
The whole nature and the business of medicine has changed. To give you an idea, when I started over 30 years ago, I came in just at when things were starting to change in medicine. So prior to my joining the private practice, the way medicine used to be practiced was that doctors were in charge. Doctors told you what to do, and then you just did it. And then doctors were in charge of what tests to order, what procedures you would have done. They had full carte blanche over managing your healthcare. And then just as I started practice, this gnarly thing called HMOs and managed care became the new world order. And a lot of people had trouble trying to navigate and figure out what was different. Wait a minute, I can't just see anybody I want to see. And it was very difficult for doctors as well because you couldn't just automatically make decisions. You had to clear them with this, or this might be covered, this might not be covered. And that was a huge upheaval and a shift in how medicine was practiced. And that's been going on for 30 years. And the one thing I can say to you is that every time something seismic happens like that, we think, oh, I liked it so much the old way, but here's the reality. We're never going back to the old way. So you just need to get used to that. And we have, for the most part. Now we know how to navigate in a managed care environment. Now what we're seeing is that we're seeing the next phase, which is the corporatization of medical practices. The number of practices that are physician owned. Physicians we weren't only doctors, we were small business owners. That model no longer exists. It has become untenable. So it doesn't work for doctors, and it's changed the nature of the doctor-patient relationship because when managed care happened, you realize the patients used to belong to us. And when managed care happened 30 plus years ago, now the patients belong to the insurer, and they will decide you can either be part of this network or not, but the patients aren't yours. And now we are seeing the completion of the takeover of medicine because now, in many instances, the practice itself does not belong to the doctors. You don't own the space. You don't manage the personnel. All of the things that you used to do as a small business owner have been taken over either by large hospital systems that come in and buy your practice, or private equity groups that come in and buy practices and put them all together. And It's come between doctors and their patients because doctors can no longer, I can't decide who my patients are and which ones I keep and which ones go because patients will change doctors depending upon their insurance. Your insurer will change. You may change jobs or your employer may change insurance companies. And so it's a lot of stuff between the doctor and the patient. And that has really, I think, deteriorated. The relationship has deteriorated as a result of that. So what does that mean to you? That means that you have to get used to telling your story perhaps to a different person, a different practitioner. You might go to one practice and then now insurance changes, and I have to tell my story to someone else. So the continuity of care that I expected. I was in one practice for 30 years. I saw patients from high school to college to childbirth to menopause. That's no longer going to be the lived experience of women. And what that means, is it good or bad? All I can say is it's what it is. And we're not going back to the old days where, oh, my doctor is just going to take care of me, or my doctor knows me. You may have to tell your story to a stranger every time you change a job or your employer changes insurance. That means that I can no longer accept. That's why I said no one's coming to save you. That person doesn't know you. The only person that knows you and cares intimately about your health is you.
Yeah.
And it's not to say there aren't good doctors. There are, but they don't know you. So you have to understand that this is the environment. A lot of that responsibility that we ceded to doctors before has now got to be yours. And if you knew that, I think you could take better care. You would know how to navigate the system a little better than the way you did 30 years ago.
It is a harsh reality, but definitely an opportunity to empower ourselves. All these conferences that I've gone to hear you speak, it's incredible to see women taking notes, women craving this information and really asking the question, why didn't I know this?
Right.
But we're stepping up. We're smart. Our generation is smart. And I'm so grateful to doctors like you, a lot of the doctors who share their expertise on social media platforms at these conferences, who are really stepping in and using their voice to empower us. And we're ready. We're ready to take that information and run with it. I took so many notes from chapter 2 in your book because it's packed with actionable tips on how we can equip ourselves to be our best advocates. So what stood out for me most is this advice that not only helped me personally, but also gave me tools to support my family, my mother in particular, as I mentioned earlier, is you emphasize the importance of having honest conversations with our loved ones about our health history and future plans, even suggesting that we talk about that around the dinner table or at family gatherings. Could you elaborate on why these conversations are so crucial and how can we get started on having this conversation with our family members?
I think the first place to start is to know your own personal health history. And I can tell you from experience how many patients come into the doctor's office. And these are smart people. These are not people who are on the margins. Smart people who come in and they don't know what surgeries they've had. They're on medications. They don't know what they are. They don't know what doses they are because the assumption is you have that, right? Didn't you write it down? That's your job, doctor. But as I say, you're going to have that different times with different people. The same thing is true of your family history. There's so much about our family histories that we don't discuss. And in certain cultures, certainly, I don't know if it is in your house, but there were things that people just didn't talk about. Everyone would get all quiet when they were talking about things like cancer and mental health and certain conditions that women, what in my family, my mother would call female troubles, because there was an element of shame and embarrassment about them. And people didn't speak openly as if somehow their illness or their sickness or whatever befell them was somehow their fault. It was embarrassing and you didn't want to talk about it in open company. And that shame, and I think that lack of discussion has not served us well, because what we need to know about our family history is not what are we going to have as we get older, or what am I destined to experience? It's just a signpost. It gives you an idea of the things that you may be susceptible to, not the things that you're going to have. And the one thing I say in my book is I said, genetics is not destiny. And the overwhelming majority of illnesses that befall us, particularly as we age, are more environmental. They are much more nurtured than nature in terms of the things that we have. So, what's important about knowing your family history is that you need to know what those warning signs are. And I often use this analogy where I say, you're knowing your family history is like, if you're driving down the road and you see a sign up ahead and it says bridge out. If you see that, you don't put your foot on the gas and keep driving because we know that's not going to end well. At the minimum, you should slow up. But what I'd really like for you to do is to intervene early enough where you can really put your foot on the brakes and turn that car around, because a bad outcome, just because it runs in your family, is not inevitable. We
Mm.
share as families a lot of things: behaviors, environment, how we engage with medical care, the food we eat. All of these things are far more important in terms of our ultimate outcome than what our genes are. But you need to know what you are susceptible to so you know when to intervene and how to intervene. And that's the importance of that conversation. And I don't know when this is going to air, but for those of you who don't know, next week for us is going to be Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving has been designated by the CDC as like Family History Health Day. It's an opportunity. We're all gathering, everyone's around the table. And while we're being thankful, it's also a time for us to be truthful and to gather information, because that information is going to be helpful for every single person who knows it. So at least you know what to look out for.
I read that in your book and I thought that was, perfect timing. Use a Thanksgiving holiday, whether it's around the bigger dining table or just smaller gatherings. Most of us are spending full days together or maybe the whole weekend together to have those conversations. I think it's so important, and to involve our partners. There's conversations now about how to involve our partners in it, men in the conversation. It not only impacts us, menopause impacts everyone around us. Your book provides a roadmap for key pillars of health, lifestyle choices. You talk about bodily systems that we need to pay attention to, like our cardiovascular health, our brain health, and of course, perimenopause and menopause. And I've heard you say that once you're in menopause, you're always in menopause. And in the book, you say it's like being a parent. I've also heard you talk about health span in this conversation. What do you want every woman to know about how menopause affects their health span? And what steps can they take to optimize their well-being during this life stage?
I think that the good news about the conversations that you and I have had, and we've been all around the country having these conversations, is that we're really trying to lose the stigma and the shame and the embarrassment around women's health and our bodily functions. And so much of our lives have been spent being embarrassed about being a woman and the things that women's bodies do. And I think that the one thing that the misconception that people have had about menopause, and when I talk about this in my book, the reason why I don't like the term postmenopause, because it somehow gives the impression that you're over it. You're not. You'll reach menopause when you've had your last menstrual period. It's confirmed after you haven't had a period for another 12 months. But from that point forward, you are menopausal. You are a menopausal woman. And the long-term health implications of being menopausal and not having estrogen in your body, it affects your bones, it affects your brain, it affects your heart, your skin, your hair, every single organ system in your body, one way or the other, is going to be affected. Now, certain people are affected more than others. Now, that's not to say, oh my God, everybody's destined to doom and deterioration as we age. No, and that's why lifestyle is important. It's always important, whether we're talking about how you're going to navigate menopause or heart disease or any of the other chronic illnesses that befall us as we age. But I think it's so important that you know that menopause is not a one and done. Just because you stop having hot flashes does not mean that you're over menopause. That will always be an issue that needs to be attended to. And I think that once women understand the full life implications and the health implications of menopausal and being menopausal and what that does, that at least allows you to make an informed choice about how you choose to navigate the rest of your life. And I think that, again, that combination of knowing what you're susceptible to in your family history, if you have a family history of osteoporosis or you have a family history of cardiovascular disease, then you might take care and make different decisions as you enter the menopausal space. But make no mistake about it, you're not done because your hot flashes went away.
And you talk about all the major health systems that are impacted by our hormones and what actions we can take and what we should be aware of. So I think, again, this is an incredible roadmap to really honing in on not just menopause, but every aspect of our health. And talking about those stories that we hear or we didn't hear growing up, I know that we saw things. And one of the things that I did see was my mother suffering unnecessarily. She suffered depression, low mood. I saw them in hindsight. I realized, oh my gosh, that was menopause. And one of the key takeaways from your book is this idea that even though menopause is mandatory, suffering is not. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard it from my mother and my aunties that suffering is it's part of womanhood. Why do you think this narrative around menopause has been steeped in suffering? And how can women shift their perspective and take more control?
It starts at the beginning. Women's suffering is so deeply ingrained into our culture. You think about the origin story of Christianity. The first woman is the one who created the shame. She tempts Adam to bite the apple, and now she's punished. They are both punished because of her actions, the pain of childbirth for her actions. And so this notion that women are constantly either being punished or shamed for things that we do and our bodies do starts at the beginning and it does not end. You think about when we get to puberty, it is always, we have cramps, we have cycle. We call a menstrual cycle the curse. We suffer with cramps. We suffer with migraines. We suffer with childbirth. The list of things that women suffer from goes on forever and ever. And menopause is just the last of those things that women in our reproductive lives that we suffer from. When that language is so pervasive, it's difficult not to just take it as, yeah, that's part of womanhood. We suffer. And I'm here to say that we should change that language. And I think that if women are suffering, what has been where we have failed women in the medical community is that we have not addressed that suffering. We too have ignored it and acted as if, well, suffering. And I want to change the story. I want to change the narrative. I want women to speak up and not accept it. I don't want suffering to ever be your rest. If you're suffering, that should not be your resting space. You should try to figure out a way to get to someone who will help alleviate your suffering. And my interest in menopause has really been rooted in this, is that for those who say, oh, Dr. Malone, you're just pro hormones. And I'm like, no, I'm not pro hormones. I'm anti-suffering. And if hormones is the vehicle by which I can get women to feel better, do better, and be healthier, then so be it. Until I find something else that is superior to that, then that's going to be my go-to. But I don't want women, again, getting into that mindset where they think that being old means being decrepit. Being old means being in chronic pain or chronically fatigued. It is not. And I am not in the slightest way embarrassed or ashamed to say, hey, I'm 65 years old. I'm soon to be 66. And you know what? I'm having a pretty darn good time. I've paid attention to the things that I can do something about. Now, eventually, something will catch up with me. It always does. We don't get out of this alive. But until then, whatever I can do to be more productive, to be healthy, to be happy, to be mentally good. That's what I want to do. And hormones is a piece of that, but we cannot ignore the importance of lifestyle, the importance of prevention, the importance of the same 5 things that I drum in over and over after every chapter: eat a healthy diet, exercise, get a good night's sleep, don't smoke, and cut down on alcohol. Everything. That's the foundation, whether we're talking about menopausal symptoms or heart disease or cancer or Alzheimer's. That is always the foundation. And once you've done all those things and you're saying, okay, but I'm still not good, then we need to find something else to put on top of that. But, it's not an either or. And I don't profess to say that every woman's solution is the same, but I think that every woman should have the full spectrum of options to choose from. And then whichever one you choose, that's up to you. But have an idea that your goal should be not to feel like I want to be 60 and be meh. Oh no, I want to be 60 and be great. I want to be able to move around. I have a simple goal. And my goal is, I've been doing a lot of traveling. And I have 2 things. I said, I want to be able to, when I get off the plane, no matter how far that next gate is, I want to be able to walk there. And once I get on that plane, I want to be able to pick up my bag and put it in the overhead compartment because I don't want to check a bag. These are functional goals that I think we should all have. And as you see people, and when you're out there in the world, you say, wow, there's a lot of dysfunction in terms of how we move about that we've really got to address. So the message that we get to women, I think the earlier you get the message, the better. But it's never too late to do better if
Mm.
you really understood the importance of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You share very poignant stories about the impact of stress, especially on Black women. You give examples of your sisters, your mother's experiences. This book is for all women, but I know you address this particular experience of Black women. And I've had Dr. Samina Rahman, Omishade Bernie Scott here talk about the allostatic load that Black women carry. What do you want women, especially Black women, to know about managing chronic stress and its long-term effects on health?
I think that, again, it gets back to what do you accept? And I think that there's a lot about our lives that, and particularly when it comes to stress, that we don't always have control over. And acute stress is fine. You need it. If you didn't get stressed, you might not study for your exams or you couldn't run out of a burning building. That kind of a stress is important and it's physiologic. What's not good and what wears you down is chronic stress. And we cannot fail to acknowledge the fact that the stress that Black women face, the stress that poor women face, stress that any women who are marginalized in this country faced is a very different animal because it is chronic and it is pervasive. If you are worried about whether or not you can put food on the table, whether you can pay your rent, or whether every time your child walks out of the house, if you feel that they are threatened or unsafe, or workplace stress, if that is where you are living, just understand that it's more than just an emotional and psychological toll that's being taken. It is taking a toll on your body. It is activating your autonomic nervous system. It is raising your blood pressure. It is disrupting your sleep. It is making you chronically fatigued and irritable and depressed. All of those things which negatively affect your health. And there are certain things that we have to realize that even though we cannot always control the circumstances around us, what we can control is that we have to understand what are our reactions to that stress. We have to know when we have reached a point where I need help, be it mental health services, be it I need to figure out how I'm going to exercise and dispel some of this, any number of things, whatever really works for you. But I think that particularly Black women, we internalize a lot of the stress because again, it gets back to the expectation of life is hard, life is all about suffering, and there is something to be learned from occasional sufferings and even failures. But the reality is you can't live in that space because as we were talking about, the allostatic load or what is called weathering, Dr. Arlene Geronimus at the University of Michigan has really coined that term to explain the underpinnings of healthcare disparities across the lifespan. It's not just during menopause. It is probably that allostatic load or that accelerated aging process that happens to women, and it's probably undergirds maternal mortality, infant mortality, hypertension, heart disease, cancer, all of that. So we can't ignore the environment in which women are placed. And it's particularly acute for Black women. And the reason why I wrote the book, and you're absolutely right, that Grown Woman Talk is for everybody. But what I did is I pulled out those things that are particular to Black women. So you understand that whatever it is that I'm talking about, it doesn't get subsumed under the general message, because I really want them to know that, yes, this is true. It's especially true for you.
I spoke to Dr. Samina Rahman about healthcare providers having the cultural sensitivity to recognize that particular racial groups, especially Black women. You emphasize the importance of finding a healthcare provider who respects and listens to you. What advice do you have for women of color, Black women who are navigating those short and often transactional doctor's appointments to get the care they deserve?
Here's a problem. Here's a big problem. We are facing in this country a shortage of physicians, period, across the board. We don't have enough physicians to address the aging population. The over 65 group is one of the largest, the fastest growing demographics. We don't have enough doctors. So how are we going to address that? And if I say, it's really great, when we're out there in menopause world, we always say, oh, great, you should find a doctor who knows how to treat menopause and who understands this. And it's wonderful. Good luck. Because chances are you may not be able to locate that person. And I say the same thing, to find a culturally competent doctor. It's the same if English is not your first language. If you are a Spanish-speaking person, there's no doubt in my mind that if you are trying to communicate with someone who does not speak your language, that's not going to be an optimum therapeutic relationship. The same is true for race. Good luck. You know that there are only 5% of physicians in this country are African American. Most of them are concentrated in large cities. So there are huge swaths where you're just not going to be able to find that. So that's why I want to empower women to know the things that they should be asking in the event that you cannot find that ideal doctor that you're looking for, who sees you and hears you and takes time. It's going faster and faster. You've got 5 to 7 minutes of time, of doctor FaceTime, if that. Because many times you're going to see a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant or someone else. You're not going to even see a doctor. So learning how to be efficient, learning how to tell your story, to be able to highlight the important parts about your history, your family history, that your healthcare professional should know, is important. I tell you the other piece of it that's really going to be, I think, the wave of the future, since we can't manufacture any more doctors. Even if we started tomorrow, if you double the number of people entering med school, it would be 15, 20 years down the road before you would really see the outcome of that. So what do? We have to be innovative. We've got to understand that there are ways to deliver care that in today's world may not be best suited for one-on-one doctor-patient sit in the office. It's inefficient for you as a patient. It's inefficient for the doctor, to be quite honest with you. Because remember, I can't decide how long I'm going to stay with the patient. This corporate person who owns my practice is telling me how much time I get with the patient. And so it gets smaller and smaller. What we're going to have to do is harness the technology. We have telehealth, we have digital health. That's why Alloy Women's Health exists, because even though we do all this great educating out there in the world of telling women, oh yes, you should have hormone therapy, get someone who knows what they're doing, and then you can't find them. Guess what? I don't think that any woman who lives, the woman who lives in New Mexico, should have any less information or access to care than someone who lives in New York City or Los Angeles. And that's where the beauty of telehealth and digital health and a platform like Alloy really comes into play, because we can leverage the expertise of one doctor. I have my 30 years of experience. If I saw patients all day, every day, there's only so many I can touch. But what I can do is I can train other doctors. I can make sure that they have the information that they need. And in an environment where we can leverage that expertise of a few doctors over hundreds, over thousands of patients, that's the way we're going to have to practice in the 21st century. It's going to involve AI. Whether you know it or not, it already does. It's already part of it. AI is reading your mammograms and reading a lot of other the radiological procedures. This is how we're going to have to do it. And I don't think that this is something we should be afraid of. I think it's something that we just need to understand how to harness and know what the benefits are and what the limitations are of it. And in some instances, that's better than an in-person visit, particularly if for that in-person visit, you have to wait 6 or 8 months to get it.
Yeah, I've seen so many innovative ways these telehealth practices are working, establishing memberships so that you have continuity of care.
Right.
I love that after an illustrious and well-established career as an OBGYN, you made this career pivot, as you mentioned at the beginning, to become Chief Medical Officer of Alloy Women's Health. As you've already pointed out, they're a telemedicine company focused on women over 40. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that and what inspired you to make this shift, and how do you see that a company like Alloy, the role they play in addressing these gaps in access, education, and personalized care?
Gabriella, I wish I could say, oh, it was all my idea. It wasn't. I told you, I was just like, oh, I'm done with this. I'm done with this part of my life, even though I thought I had done, I had put in my time. And it was really that this is why you need young people in your life. And I said, because they think of different ways to do things. And I really have to credit Ann and Monica. And it was Monica Mollenauer's quest, because she too was one of those people who was struggling and could not find adequate care for her menopausal symptoms because she had her ovaries removed at 40. And to be thrust into menopause prematurely at that age and to not be able to find someone to help her was really frustrating. And that's not an uncommon story. People have been looking, they've gone to 5 or 6 doctors before they finally settle on someone who knows how to treat them. So that was their idea. Their job was, oh, okay, there's another way to do this. They came up with the telehealth concept, but they weren't doctors. So if you want to be good and you want to deliver good care, then you need the expertise of someone who has done it. And menopause has been a part of my practice for the entire time I've been in practice. It's not something that, even though it's all on social media, I have literally been taking care of menopausal patients for the entirety of my career, simply because when I started as a new young doctor, the practice had been in existence for 30 years before I got there. So on day one, when the older doctors retired, I had their 80-year-olds. So, I've got 80-year-olds, I've got 18-year-olds, I've got pregnant people and everything in between. So that's why I say this all the time when I'm out, but I said, no, I'm one of those people that the old people who I have been practicing for 10 years before the Women's Health Initiative came out. So this notion of not knowing what to do and what it meant and how to put it in context was never my issue, because many of us who read that study when it came out said, it didn't say that. That's not true. We had years of experience to the contrary. And so that's why I can take things, look at them in context and say, and make some decisions that someone who maybe just started doing this cannot, because nothing beats personal experience for treating people. So that's how we melded. We looked at their ability to mobilize the technology. And I think Anne Fullenwater, who is a former editor of Marie Claire magazine, she has the sense of how to do it. How should it look? What appeals to women? So it was just the perfect trio of expertise and business expertise and personal expertise, the personal experience that Monica had and then my experience with menopause that really made this whole thing come together. And I'm very proud of what we've done in this short period of time. We just celebrated our anniversary
Love that.
live with Alloy. But you have to say what motivates me? Getting the care to the women who need it. That is the underlying force that keeps me going, and making sure that we keep current and that now we are enlisting. We've got other people and the conversation has moved out into the mainstream, and women are just saying, wow, I'm mad that no one told me this. And
Yeah.
I don't want any woman, like I said, you can decide to do what you want to do. You look, your decision. But I would be very sad if someone didn't have a choice to make.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So inspiring, that journey of a startup company and you pivoting to join them. You have this fascinating history because you were practicing medicine during a pivotal moment, right? Before the release of the Women's Health Initiative study, which we've spoken about here on the podcast, which caused so many women to stop using hormones due to the perceived risks. And I know a lot of that history shapes the work that you're doing today and joining a platform like Alloy that makes hormone therapy more accessible to women. What do you wish women understood about the role of hormone therapy in managing menopause symptoms and improving long-term health?
I wish they understood what this statement that the Menopause Society and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has said. For the symptoms of menopause, there is nothing more effective than hormone therapy. And I think that women spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money chasing things that don't work. And I think that if they just understood that if you are symptomatic, that's the answer, provided that you don't have any of the contraindications for why you shouldn't. And I think that we spend a lot of time trying to go around, we go around the block, and we never get anywhere because, what the answer is for many women is right there in front of their faces. And I think that when you look at the long-term health implications, as we said, cutting down the risk of cardiovascular disease, cutting down the risk of osteoporosis, and my goodness, the sexual dysfunction, vaginal dryness, and painful intercourse and urinary tract infections, those things have real life implications for most women. And those are regardless of whether or not you have a hot flash or not. Those are real long-term health implications that affect not only the length of your life, but the quality of your life. And let me put in a plug right here for quality of life. Even if, let's just take off the table, even if hormone therapy did not have those long-term health benefits, if all it did is help you sleep at night,
Mm.
eliminate your hot flashes, gave you back a little bit of energy, preserved your sexual function, what would be wrong with that? Forget all the other stuff. As if that doesn't matter. It matters to women. Women's quality of life matters. And I think that, again, if you don't take that into account, then you're getting back into that old mode of thinking that, oh, women just suffer. They
Yeah.
suffer and they complain. That's the general thing. You think about how many women, I see, this is the thing. I didn't have that experience with my mother because my mother died when I was 12 years old. So I have no experience of knowing what her menopause would have been like. But this I can assure you that whatever it was, she would have kept it to herself. There was no option for her to go and get treatment or get relief. It would be that same thing, that stress, that all that stuff that you just internalize and chalk it up to poor me. I was born a woman. I
Yeah.
guess that's my lot in life. Nah,
Mm.
not so much. We're not doing that anymore.
Yeah. And I know you're flying that flag of women do not have to suffer at this life stage. And we don't have to wait until things start feeling really badly. Don't wait till you start suffering. You can start menopause hormone therapy earlier than that 1 year when after your periods start, right?
Exactly.
I,
Exactly. And that sort of, it's funny because I don't know if you've been watching, there's this trend on Instagram where doctors are posting like, I was a terrible menopause doctor. These are the youngsters who were trained in the post WHI era. And I don't blame them. It's just that they were never taught. And then they believed all the negative stuff about hormone therapy that the general public was taught. Oh, it's terrible. It causes cancer. It doesn't help with heart. There's that. But you know what? And I will say this, and I resisted the urge. I'm like, no, I'm not going to say, because I was saying, you know what? Actually, I was a pretty good menopause doctor. I've learned some things, even with that, with having had that experience and not being afraid to use hormones. There have been things that I have learned. And that the more you delve into it and the more you look into the data, I'm a better menopause doctor than I was 5 years ago, simply because now that is my singular focus in terms of how I make sure that I'm treating women.
And thank you so, so much for that. I want to finish off by just letting everyone know that your book is so beautifully personal. It even includes playlists, music playlists at the end of chapters. I know you are a secret DJ. What role does music play for you in your overall health and healing and experiencing pleasure in midlife?
Music is my great joy. That was one of the things that I missed the most during COVID, is that we didn't have the ability to go out and see live music and little clubs play. My mother died when I was 12, and I grew up, though, in a house with much older brothers and sisters. So music was always in the background of our house. And then as I moved around, and I moved around a lot during my middle school and high school years, there was always a musical soundtrack to my life. I know where I was when a particular song was out. I can track the years. It is a great joy and a great sense of comfort for me. And so that's what, if there's anything I could say that consistently gives me joy and pleasure, it is good music, and good music that I like to share with others. And that's why I said, if I'm going to write a book, I can't write a book and just not put some music in there, because I did not want the book to be just like, this, so I try to infuse a little humor. I try to infuse a little music, and I say every chapter has a playlist. So I say, if it gets too tough, or we're talking about something, or on the chapter about Alzheimer's, close the book, go to Spotify or Apple Music and go to Grown Woman Talk book. It's a playlist. It's already there for you. And you can just play a little music, calm yourself down, dance a bit, and then come back and meet me in the next chapter.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Malone, for infusing this incredible guide with so much pleasure, so much of your expertise, and really so much of your empowerment. You are a role model that we all look up to for how to age beautifully and really boldly, and owning our pleasure and our power. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you for having me. And don't forget to tell your listeners that for anyone who, if you go to myalloy.com, you can use the Grown Woman Talk code. It's GWT25, and you get $25 off whatever order you put in. But the main thing, the point is that I want you to make sure that you have a place to go. So if you are not getting the care that you need, just know that's exactly why we exist.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great little perk. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to add that to the show notes. This will be airing during Thanksgiving week. Anything that you want to express gratitude for?
You know what? I am grateful. And that's, again, one of the chapters in my book, as I talk about the importance of community. And I am so grateful that my kids are grown, they're gone. But throughout it all, I think what has made my life meaningful and doable is the community of women. And I have always had that in my life, and I think that I always will. And let's not forget that for women, the women who do well as we age, it is usually women who have a community of women of support around them. And let's not ever forget that.
Yeah, we cannot menopause alone.
No, we cannot.
Thank you again, Dr. Malone, for your presence, for your expertise, for your wisdom. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Same here, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pleasure in the Pause. Want to help me spread more pleasure in the world? Hit the share episode button and send it to a friend or post it on your Instagram stories and tag me, Gabriella Espinosa. And if you really love this podcast, please leave a rating or review, as this helps the show get in front of new listeners. Finally, if you would like to access even more pleasure and stay in touch, sign up for my free Pleasure Upgrade bundle of powerful mind-body practices by going to pleasureinthepause.com. Remember, your pleasure matters.